Okay, guys, before we talk about anything else, I need you to answer one question honestly. If someone you broke up with, someone who admitted he put you last for almost a year, suddenly shows up near you, orders roses, and tells you he is moving closer to you, is that romantic? Or is that pressure dressed up like romance? Because that is exactly where Teegan Nichols is right now with Ethan Plath. And the more you actually look at this storyline, the less it feels like a sweet love story, and the more it feels like a very uncomfortable test of boundaries, timing, and whether Ethan really understands what he did wrong. On the surface, this looks like the classic reality TV redemption arc. We have seen this set up 100 times. The guy messes up. The girl walks away. He realizes what he lost. He buys flowers. He makes a huge gesture. He shows up with serious eyes and soft music playing in the background, and the audience is supposed to think, wow, he finally gets it. But that is not what happens here. Teegan is not melting. She is not acting like she has been waiting by the window for Ethan to ride back into her life with roses and a moving plan. She is cautious. She is guarded. She is basically reminding him, without needing to scream it, that a big gesture does not erase a long pattern. And that is the part Ethan does not seem to fully understand yet. Because Teegan had two very clear deal breakers. First, Ethan needed to actually live near her if this relationship was ever going to work. Second, he could not still be legally married. Those are not tiny little preferences. Those are not, maybe one day we should talk about this, issues. Those are serious, grown-up relationship conditions. So when Ethan suddenly shows up with this big plan, the real question is not, does he love her? The real question is, has he changed enough to be trusted? That is what this video is really about. Is Ethan finally growing up and taking accountability? Or is he trying to overwhelm Teegan with one huge romantic move before he has actually fixed the practical things that matter? Is Teegan being cold to a guy who is trying? Or is she the only person in this situation who understands that boundaries are not punishment, they are protection? And when Ethan says his plan to move does not depend on whether they get back together, does that sound mature? Or does it sound like a man who has already decided the emotional direction before the woman involved has even had space to choose? Because that is where this gets complicated. This is not just a breakup. This is not just a man trying to win back his ex. This is about whether Ethan understands the difference between making a dramatic move and becoming a stable partner. And those are not the same thing. Now let's break down what actually happened. Ethan is planning this surprise move toward Teegan. He orders roses. He talks about how nervous he is. He admits he has not seen her in months. He says he has not talked to her in forever. And then he admits something very important. He basically put her last for about a year. That line matters. Because when someone admits, I put you last, that is not a small mistake. That is not forgetting one date night. That is not missing one phone call. That is a pattern. And when a pattern lasts long enough, the apology has to be bigger than words and bigger than flowers. It has to be consistent behavior over time. But Ethan's plan is very Ethan. He does not want to tell Teegan he is moving until he already has action behind it. He wants skin in the game. And I need us to sit with that phrase for a second, because that one phrase tells us so much about how Ethan is processing the whole situation. Skin in the game sounds like a business phrase. It sounds like an investment phrase. It sounds like something you say when you want to prove commitment through a concrete decision. But romance is not a real estate deal. Love is not a down payment. A relationship is not fixed because you can point to a lease, a moving plan, or a dozen roses and say, see? I did something. That is the issue. Ethan seems to be treating an emotional problem like a logistics problem. And yes, logistics matter. Living close matters. Being legally available matters. Following through matters. But the emotional wound here is not just that Ethan lived too far away. The wound is that Teegan did not feel prioritized. She did not feel secure. She did not feel like his words matched his actions. So if Ethan wants to repair that, the answer cannot just be, I moved. The answer has to be, I understand why you stopped trusting me, and I am willing to rebuild that trust at your pace. That is a completely different energy, and this is where the story starts to turn. Because from Ethan's point of view, he probably thinks he is finally doing the thing Teegan asked for. She wanted him closer, so he is moving closer. She wanted effort, so he is showing effort. She wanted proof, so he is trying to give proof. But from Teegan's point of view, this may not feel like proof yet. It may feel like pressure. Because this is not the first time Ethan has said the big thing. From what the storyline tells us, he had already talked about moving before. He had already created hope before. So by the time he actually starts doing it, Teegan is not reacting to one romantic moment. She is reacting to the entire history behind that moment. And that is the difference a lot of people miss. When trust is already damaged, the same action does not land the same way. If someone has always followed through, a big romantic move feels safe. It feels exciting. It feels meaningful. But if someone has a pattern of saying things and not fully following through, then even a big romantic move can feel suspicious. Not because the person receiving it is cruel, not because they are ungrateful, but because they have learned to listen to patterns more than promises. And honestly, that might be Teegan's strongest moment in this episode. She is not reacting to the fantasy version of Ethan. She is reacting to the Ethan she has actually experienced. That is why her body language and her words feel so important. She is not giving him the emotional reaction he wants. She is not rewarding the drama of the gesture. She is saying, in her own way, "I will believe the pattern when I see the pattern change." That is mature. It may not be warm. It may not be romantic. It may not give Ethan the moment he hoped for, but it is mature. And this brings us to one of the biggest contradictions in Ethan's behavior. Ethan says he knows flowers will not magically win Teegan back. He says that clearly. He understands, at least on some level, that roses are not a relationship repair kit. But then he still leans into the grand gesture. He still orders the flowers. He still creates the surprise. He still shows up with this emotional presentation, almost like part of him knows it is not enough, but another part of him hopes it will still move the needle. That is not strategy. That is desperation. And I do not say that to insult Ethan. I actually think that is what makes this storyline interesting. Ethan does not come across like someone who is trying to be cruel. He comes across like someone who is panicking because he finally understands what he might have lost. But panic is not the same as growth. That is the problem. A person can be genuinely sorry and still not be ready. A person can genuinely love you and still not know how to show up in a healthy way. A person can make a huge gesture and still not understand the smaller, quieter, daily habits that make a relationship feel safe. And that is where Teegan is stuck. Because she is not just asking, "Does Ethan care about me?" She is asking, "Can Ethan be consistent?" That is the question that decides everything. Can he show up when there are no cameras? Can he communicate before making giant decisions? Can he follow through after the dramatic moment is over? Can he respect her boundaries even when they disappoint him? Because loving someone when they are giving you hope is easy. Respecting someone when they are telling you no, not yet, or maybe never, that is where you find out who a person really is. And Teegan gives him some very clear signals. She reminds him they are not dating. She points out that he is supposed to be in Georgia. She explains that him living nearby was a deal breaker. She also brings up the fact that he cannot still be married if he wants to date her. And that part matters a lot. Because this is not just about distance. It is also about emotional availability and legal closure. Ethan may feel separated. Ethan may feel done with his marriage emotionally. But from Teegan's perspective, there is still a major difference between "my previous relationship is emotionally over" and "my previous marriage is legally finished." And honestly, she has every right to care about that. Some viewers may say, well, if the marriage is already over in his heart, why does the paperwork matter? Because it matters. It matters for stability. It matters for emotional clarity. It matters for what kind of future you can actually build. And it matters because Teegan is not obligated to step into a romantic relationship with a man whose previous marriage is still legally unresolved. That is not her being cold. That is her being careful. And after everything viewers have seen with Ethan and Olivia over the years, it makes sense that Teegan would not want to become the next chapter before the last chapter is fully closed. That is not insecurity. That is basic self-protection. Now, let's talk about the family element, because I think this is one of the quieter pieces of this storyline, but it matters more than people want to admit. Ethan's romantic life has never existed in a normal bubble. This is a man whose marriage played out under family pressure, public criticism, religious background, emotional distance, and years of conflict. His relationship with Olivia was not just a private marriage. It became part of the entire Plath family story. So now, when Ethan is trying to move forward with Teegan, there is a bigger question hanging over everything. Is he choosing a partner because he is truly ready? Or is he also looking for someone who fits more easily into his family world? That is where things get uncomfortable, because Teegan seems to get along with his family. She seems less interested in fighting the Plath system. And for Ethan, after everything he went through with Olivia, that probably feels peaceful. It probably feels easier. It probably feels like a fresh start. But easier is not always healthier. Sometimes people leave a complicated relationship and go looking for the opposite. Not because the opposite is automatically right, but because they are exhausted. They want calm. They want approval. They want someone who does not trigger the old battles. And I think that is something viewers are going to debate heavily. Is Ethan drawn to Teegan because they genuinely work? Or is he drawn to the idea of a relationship that feels simpler after years of emotional conflict? That does not mean Teegan is not a real person with real feelings. She clearly is. But it does mean Ethan needs to be careful not to turn her into the symbol of his fresh start. Because that is too much weight to put on anybody. And this is where the fan reaction gets interesting. I think viewers are going to split into a few different camps. One group will look at Ethan and say, at least he is trying. At least he is finally making the move. At least he realized what he did wrong and is putting action behind his words. And I understand that reaction. Compared to someone who makes excuses forever, Ethan taking action can look like progress. But another group is going to say, no, this is too much. He is not respecting the pace Teegan needs. He is turning her boundaries into a challenge. And I understand that reaction too. Because there is a fine line between fighting for someone and refusing to accept that they might need distance. That line is not always easy to see, especially on reality TV where the editing wants us to feel the emotion of the gesture. But in real life, the person receiving the gesture gets to decide how it feels, not the person making it. That is key. Ethan may intend this as romantic, but if Teegan experiences it as overwhelming, then her experience matters. A gesture is not automatically good just because the person doing it feels sincere. That is something a lot of people get wrong in relationships. Intentions matter, but impact matters too. You can mean well and still make someone uncomfortable. You can be trying to repair something and still move too fast. You can be deeply emotional and still need to slow down. And Ethan needs to slow down. Not because he should give up, not because Teegan owes him nothing forever, but because if his goal is truly to rebuild trust, then the first proof of change is respecting the speed of the person who was hurt. That is the real test, not the flowers, not the move, not the speech, not the big plan. The test is, can Ethan let Teegan stay uncertain without trying to pull her into certainty? Because right now, Teegan is giving him a very measured response. She is not slamming the door, but she is not opening it wide either. She is basically saying, I need to see what you actually do. And honestly, that might be the fairest position she could take. She does not owe him instant forgiveness. She does not owe him a relationship just because he drove there. She does not owe him a hug just because the moment is emotional. And that hug moment says a lot. When Ethan asks if he can hug her and she says no, that is small but huge, because it shows she is still controlling her own boundaries. She is not letting the emotion of the scene push her into a physical closeness she is not ready for. That is a good boundary. And if Ethan really wants to prove he has changed, that is the kind of boundary he has to respect without making it about his hurt feelings. Because again, this is where growth shows up. Anybody can be respectful when they are getting what they want. The real test is whether you can be respectful when the other person disappoints you. Now, let's talk about Ethan saying that his plan has not changed no matter what their future looks like. That line can be read two ways. On one hand, you could say it shows maturity. He is not putting the entire move on Teegan. He is not saying, I moved here for you, so now you owe me. He is saying this is something he wants to do for himself too. That is the generous reading. But there is another reading too. It can also sound like Ethan has already built a future in his head and is moving forward with it, whether Teegan is emotionally ready or not. And that is where the pressure comes in, because even if he says the move is not dependent on her, Teegan still knows the emotional context. She knows he is moving closer after their breakup. She knows he wants her back. She knows this is connected to their relationship. So even if Ethan says, this is my choice, Teegan may still feel the weight of being the reason behind it. And that is a lot. Especially when she has already said their current relationship is not changing for the time being. That phrase matters. For the time being. It means she is not making a forever decision in that moment. She is not necessarily saying never. But she is also not saying yes. She is leaving the door cracked, but she is not inviting him inside. And Ethan has to learn how to live in that uncomfortable space. That is hard for anyone, but especially for someone who seems to want a clear answer quickly. The deeper issue here is that Ethan seems to want certainty from Teegan before he has given her enough consistency to feel safe being certain. That is the whole problem in one sentence. He wants the emotional reward of change before the change has had time to become real. And in relationships, time matters. A promise can be made in one moment. A pattern has to be proven over many moments. That is why Teegan is watching, and that is why viewers should be watching too. Because this storyline is not going to be solved by whether Ethan moves. It is going to be solved by how he behaves after he moves. Does he keep showing up? Does he communicate better? Does he respect the fact that Teegan may still not be ready? Does he make her feel safe? Or does he keep making her feel responsible for his emotional state? That is where the story is going to reveal itself. Now, if we are talking predictions, I think this storyline has a few possible directions. The first possibility is that Ethan keeps trying too hard and ends up pushing Teegan further away. That can happen when someone is desperate to fix things. They start reading every interaction like a sign. They start looking for hope in every little moment. They start treating patience like rejection. And if Ethan does that, Teegan will probably pull back even more. The second possibility is that Teegan gives him a chance, but only after he proves he can be steady without pressuring her. That would require Ethan to stop making everything about the grand gesture and start showing consistency in boring, ordinary ways. And honestly, boring consistency is what this relationship needs. Not another emotional speech, not another surprise, not another dramatic move. Just steady, respectful, normal behavior over time. The third possibility is that Teegan realizes the trust is too damaged, or the timing is too messy, and she decides not to reopen the relationship. And if that happens, Ethan will have to accept that growth does not always get rewarded with the outcome you wanted. That is a hard lesson, but it is a real one. Sometimes you do become better. Sometimes you do understand the mistake. Sometimes you do finally show up. And the person you hurt still does not have to come back. That is not unfair. That is consequence. And this is why I think the audience reaction to Teegan is going to be very divided. Some people are going to say she is giving mixed signals. They will say if she does not want Ethan, she should just fully shut it down. They will say she should not talk about trips or keep the door open if she is not sure. And I get why people might see it that way. But I also think uncertainty is allowed. Teegan does not have to make a clean, perfect, audience-friendly decision in one conversation. Real feelings are messy. She can care about Ethan and still not trust him. She can enjoy his family and still not want to date him right now. She can have history with him and still need space. That is not necessarily mixed signals. That can be emotional conflict. And Ethan's job is not to exploit that conflict. His job is to respect it. That is the part I keep coming back to. Because the strongest version of Ethan would not be the man who wins Teegan back with roses. The strongest version of Ethan would be the man who says, I understand why you do not trust me yet. I am going to keep working on myself, and I am not going to pressure you into forgiving me on my timeline. That would be growth. That would be different. That would show he actually learned something. Because right now, what we are seeing is a man who knows he messed up, but may not fully understand that the person he hurt gets to decide what repair looks like. And that is the heart of this storyline. It is not whether Ethan is a bad person. I do not think this is that simple. It is not whether Teegan is heartless. I do not think that is fair either. It is about timing. It is about trust. It is about whether love can survive when one person wants immediate repair and the other person needs evidence over time. And the uncomfortable truth is, Ethan may have waited too long to become the person Teegan needed him to be. That does not mean it is impossible, but it does mean flowers are not enough. Moving is not enough. Saying the right thing is not enough. The only thing that might be enough is consistency, and consistency is boring. It is quiet. It does not always make great television. It does not come wrapped in roses. It does not make a dramatic scene by the side of the road, but it is what actually rebuilds trust. So when I look at this Ethan and Teegan situation, I do not see a simple romantic comeback story. I see a woman trying to decide whether a man's sudden effort is real growth or just fear of loss. I see a man who may truly love her, but who still needs to learn that love without respect for timing can become pressure. And I see a relationship that is standing right on the edge of a very important question. Has Ethan actually changed? Or is he just scared because Teegan finally stopped waiting? That is what viewers are going to be debating. And honestly, that is what makes this storyline so much stronger than a basic recap. Because the episode gives us the event, but the behavior tells us the truth. Ethan can move closer. He can buy flowers. He can say he is serious. He can tell Teegan his plans have not changed. But Teegan is still allowed to say, "I need to see it first." And that might be the most reasonable thing anyone has said in this entire situation. So now I want to know what you think. Was Ethan's move a real sign of growth? Or was it too much too fast? Was Teegan right to hold her boundary? Or do you think she is keeping Ethan hanging? And most importantly, if someone put you last for a year, would roses and a moving plan be enough to make you reconsider? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those storylines where the audience is definitely not going to agree.